Words of our Divine Mother from the book The Mother, Question and Answers of 1956, Volume 8, page 36. Our Divine Mother shows a white champak flower which she was holding in her hand, and she has named this flower as psychological perfection. And then our Divine Mother says, "Who remembers this?" And she was counting the petals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 psychological perfections. Who's ready to give me the 5 psychological perfections? What are they? And all those who were standing in front she was addressing them. In fact, in those days, our Divine Mother used to give on the first of every month in the prosperity room these kinds of flowers to the children and to the devotees, and she would ask the meaning of those flowers. And when the devotees and the children were giving the answers, our Divine Mother states, "What is always there in all the combinations of these perfections, and to whomsoever I give these flowers, the first among them all is sincerity. For if there is no sincerity, one cannot advance even half a step. So this is the first, and this is always there. But it is possible to translate it by another word. If you prefer it, it would be transparency. I shall explain this word to you." And then our Divine Mother says, "Someone is in front of me and I am looking at him. I look into his eyes. And if this person is sincere or transparent, through his eyes I go down and I see his soul clearly." But this is precisely the experience. When I look at somebody, I see a little cloud, then I continue, I see a screen, then sometimes it is a wall, and afterwards it is something quite black, and all must be crossed, all this must be crossed, and holes bored in order to go through. And even then, I am not sure if it at the last minute, I may not find myself before a door of bronze so thick that I shall never get through and see his soul. So, of such a person, I can immediately say that he is not sincere. But I can also say figuratively that he is not transparent. That is the first thing. Then there's a second, which is obviously as indispensable as you go forward. It is faith. Or another word which seems more limited but is for me more important because it is a question of experience. If your faith is not made up of a complete trust in the divine, well, you may very easily remain under the impression that you have faith, and yet you will be losing all the trust in the divine power, on the divine goodness, or the trust the divine has in you. These are the 3 stumbling blocks, says our Divine Mother. Those who have what they call an unshakable faith in the divine and say, "It is the divine who is doing everything, who can do everything. All that happens in me, in others, everywhere is the work of the divine and the divine alone." If they follow this with some kind of a logic, after some time, they will start blaming the divine for all the most terrible things which take place in the world and make him a real demon or a cruel or frightful instrument. And if they have no trust, that's what happens. Or again, they do have faith, but they tell themselves, "Well, I have faith in the divine, but this world I see quite well what it is like. First of all, I suffer so much, don't I? I am very unhappy, for more unhappy than all my neighbors. For one is always more unhappy than all neighbors. I am very unhappy, and truly, life is very cruel to me. But then the divine is divine. He is all goodness, all generosity, all harmony. So, how is that I am so unhappy? He must be powerless. Otherwise, being so good, how could he let me suffer so much?" This is the second stumbling block, says our Divine Mother. And the third block, there are people who have what may be called a warped or excessive modesty or humility, and who tell themselves, "Surely the divine has thrown me out. I am good for nothing. He can do nothing with me. The only thing for me is to give up the game, for he finds me unworthy of him." So, unless one adds to the faith a total and a complete trust in the divine grace, there will be difficulties, so both are necessary. Now, we have put devotion in this series. Yes, devotion is all very well, but unless it is accomplished by many other things too, it too may take many mistakes. It may meet with great difficulties. For example, you have devotion and you keep your ego. And then your ego makes you do all sorts of things out of devotion, things which are terribly egoistic. That is to say, you think only of yourself, not of others, not of the world, nor of the work, nor what ought to be done. You think only of your devotion and you become tremendously egoistic. And so, when you find out that the divine for some reason does not answer to your devotion with the enthusiasm you expected of him, you despair and fall back into the same three difficulties I was just speaking about. Either the divine is cruel. We have read that there are many such stories of enthusiastic devotees who abuse the divine because he is no longer as gentle and near to them as before. He has withdrawn. Why hast thou deserted me? Thou hast abandoned me, O monster, they say. They don't dare to say this, but think it, or else they say, oh, I must have made a serious mistake that I am thrown out, and they fall into despair. But there is another moment, says our Divine Mother, which should be constantly accompany devotion, that kind of a sense of gratitude that the divine exists, that feeling of a marvelous thankfulness which truly fills you with a sublime joy at the fact that the divine exists, and there is something in the universe which is the divine, that it is not just a monstrosity that we see, that there is the divine exists, and each time that the least thing puts you either directly or indirectly in contact with this sublime reality of the divine existence, the heart is filled with so intense a marvelous joy, such a gratitude as of all things has the most delicious or a delightful taste. There is nothing which gives you a joy equal to that of a gratitude. One hears a bird sing, sees a lovely flower, looks at a little child, observes an act of generosity, reads a beautiful sentence, looks at the setting sun. No matter what, suddenly this comes upon you. This kind of an emotion, indeed so deep, so intense, that the world manifests the divine, that there is something beyond the world, behind the world, which is the divine. So, I find that devotion without gratitude is always incomplete. Gratitude must come with devotion. I remember that once we spoke of courage as one of the 5 perfections. I remember having written it down on the list, but this courage means having a taste for the supreme adventure, and this taste for the supreme adventure is aspiration. An aspiration which takes hold of you completely and flings you without calculation, without reserve, without a possibility of withdrawal into a great adventure of the divine discovery, the great adventure of the divine meeting, yet greater adventure of the divine realization. You throw yourself into the adventure without looking back, without asking for a single minute what's going to happen. For if you ask what is going to happen, next minute you never start, you will always get stuck there, rooted to the spot, afraid to lose anything, something to lose your balance. And that's what I'm speaking of courage. But really, it is aspiration that goes together. A real aspiration is something full of courage. And now, surrender. In English, surrender is a great word. Sri Aurobindo has said that surrender is the first and absolute condition for doing this yoga. So, if we follow what he has said, this is not just one of the necessary qualities. It is the first attitude indispensable for beginning the yoga. If one has decided to make a total surrender, one cannot begin. For this surrender to be total, all these qualities are necessary. And I add one more for that is endurance. For if you are not able to face the difficulties without getting discouraged because it is too difficult, if you are incapable of receiving blows, yet continuing of pocketing them, as they say, when you receive blows as a result of your defects, of putting them in your pocket and continuing to go forward without flagging, you don't go very far. At the first turning where you lose sight of your habitual life, you fall into despair and you give up the game. The material form of perseverance Unless you have resolved to begin the same thing over and again 1,000 times, people come to me in despair. But I thought it was done and now I begin again. But that's not thing. You will have to begin again 100 times, 1,000 times. You take one step forward and you think you are secure, but there is always something to bring up the same difficulty a little further on. You think you have resolved the problem. You will solve it yet once again. It turns up again in a different form, and it will be the different one again. Even if it comes 1,000,000 times, I should say this is quite indispensable for you to keep continuing. People have a beautiful experience and say, oh, now this one again, and it settles down, diminishes, gets weak. You are quite unexpectedly facing the situation, and you say, what's good happening, make me progress. If it's going on, I'm starting again and again. Why should I do it? I made an effort, I succeeded, I achieved something, and now it is again, I have to do it again. It is indeed hopeless, for you have no endurance. If one has endurance, one says, it's all right, good, I shall begin again as often as necessary, 1,000 times, 100,000 times I shall begin again. But I shall go to the end, and nothing will have the power to stop me on the way. This is most necessary. It is very important, very necessary. So here's my proposal. We must put surrender at the first, at the top of the list, as per Sri Aurobindo. And then to do this integral yoga, one must first resolve to surrender and entirely complete surrender to the divine. There is no other way. This is the way. But after that, one must have the 5 psychological virtues. And what are they? They are sincerity or transparency, faith or trust in the divine, devotion or gratitude, courage or aspiration, endurance or perseverance. One form of endurance is our Divine Mother is faithfulness to one's resolution, being faithful. One has taken up a resolution, one is faithful to one's own resolution. This is endurance. There you are. If one persists, there comes a time when one is victorious. Victory is to the most persistent. These are the divine words of our Divine Mother.